OTHM. This is widely recognised across the globe. So, just a few formalities. Prior to attempting this coursework assignment, learners must familiarise themselves with the following policies, which is the London School of Business, and it is also the OTHM policies and standards and recognition. My suggestion would be have a good read of those before you start. Your assessment guidelines. Learners must complete the task given in the assignment brief. You can request assistance from tutors about completing the tasks, the mark schemes and the grade descriptors. Learners must adhere to the policies and guidelines set out by the centre. Context is that you must ensure that you refer to the guidance notes and the assignment brief in full. If you are using your own organisation and some sensitive material from your organisation, you must seek permission and advice when using organisational or business information that could be considered sensitive or confidential within their assignments. If you are using it, please make sure that it is anonymous unless you have got clear permission. Your assignment criteria. Learners should read all guidance notes along with the assignment brief and mark sheets. Equip yourself with the information and formats required. Learners must achieve a minimum of 40% of the marks allocated to each task, and therefore overall a minimum of 40%. External quality assurers will be asked to ensure that the sampling of the completed student work meets the quality standard. Learners are allowed one piece of feedback for drafted answer. Your word count. So please ensure that you adhere to the word count, minus or plus 10% only. In this assignment, all tables, charts, diagrams, and referencing in text will be considered as part of your word count. So just be aware of that. That's not the same as the other assignments you may be taking. You must use the appropriate referencing system. Marks are not awarded for the use of English. However, we would like to see the appropriate terminology to convey your meaning. And we would recommend that you use the Harvard style of referencing in your work. A professional approach to work is expected from all learners. Learners must therefore identify, acknowledge all sources, methodologies, and applications used. Remember that plagiarism, which we'll go on to, is sometimes the issue when learners don't acknowledge all sources. So it's not that you're plagiarizing somebody's work, it's that you are using it in context and you haven't referenced it. So again, with the Harvard style of referencing. Okay, so plagiarism and collusion. In submitting the assignment, learners must complete a statement of authenticity, confirming that the work submitted for all tasks is their own. The statement should also include the word count. Your accredited study centre, which is London School of Business, will direct you in the appropriate software. Most recommend Turnitin. Plagiarism and collusion is treated very seriously. Plagiarism involves presenting work, excerpts, ideas or passages of another author without appropriate referencing or attribution. Collusion occurs when two or more learners submit work which is so alike in ideas, content, wording, and or structure that the similarity goes beyond mere coincidence. If you would like to read some more information about the malpractice and maladministration policy, it is on the website. As all work must be submitted on the due date as per centre's advice, it must be submitted in a single electronic document or via Turnitin. This should go to the tutor and centre programme director plus one hard copy if required. Now, so we've got the official kind of introduction out of the way. Let's start in the actual content, which is very exciting. So, human resource management contemporary HRM, and leading management and HR development. So what I want to do first is I want to go over the actual assignment wording, okay? Because often with learners, they are very clear on understanding the content. It is the way the question is phrased is often where most learners will lose marks. So we'll go over the tasks and the questions first, and then we'll dive into the content. So your first task, which is learning outcome 1 and 2, is identify, evaluate, assess the impact of changes in the global environment on selected organizations and their HR strategies and policies and practices. Learning outcome 3 and 4, identify a range of different organizational contexts for selected organizations, carry out a stakeholder analysis and an environmental audit, explaining the role of HR professionals in formulation and implementing strategies. So what I have done here is I've identified where there is often learners lose marks. So in your first question, where I've put the arrows are the things that you need to make sure that you cover. The word count is 3,000 words for both of these questions, which can be difficult to do. So you want to clearly use the verbs in your question or in your answer. So identify, evaluate, and assess. So often learners go straight to the content here, but they don't look at the verbs at the start of the question. And that's where either there's a fail or a distinct lack of marks. So make sure that you go through this in your plan. Identify, evaluate, and assess the impacts of changes in the global environment. So there's 3 verbs there. You need to make sure all 3 are included, okay? In the second one, again, identify. The verb here is identify a range of different organizational contexts for selected organizations, carry out a stakeholder analysis and environmental audit, okay? And then the second part of that question is explaining the role of HR professionals in formulation and implementing strategies. So my suggestion on these 2 questions would be divide your answer into a plan and put it in 3 points. So identify the impact of changes, evaluate them, and assess them, okay? In your second question, identify a range of different organizational contexts, do your stakeholder analysis and your environmental audit, and then explain how HR professionals would formulate strategies in those contexts. Okay, so make sure you go through all of those. Your task 2 is critically evaluate the nature of leadership theories and their contribution to organizational strategies and goals, with particular reference to the contribution of HR leadership strategies in selected organizations for management of change. This is a massive area of leadership at the minute because of the amount of change. It never was not there, but it's a lot more of a focus because of the globe and the different changes that we're experiencing on a huge level. Your second one here is formulate and critically evaluate ethical strategies for HRM and HRD to selected organizations and explain the changing role of HR functions as based on these organizations. And your last one is analyze own personal development needs and learning styles, plan own development program over at least 6 months, reflect on and evaluate evidence of your own development. So again, I have clearly set out where learners can often lose marks or end up failing your assignment. So your first one is critically evaluate. It is not just evaluate, it is critically evaluate. Make sure you have a look at that in the dictionary or another source to make sure that you're quite clear on what you need to do there. So critically evaluate the nature of leadership theories and their contribution to organizational strategies is the first part of your question. So we will go over the different leadership theories there is and how that would affect an organization and how that would feed into HR leadership strategies. So remember, the first part of it is the leadership theories. Then the second part of it is HR leadership strategies. And then in terms of managing change. So that's your 3 elements on that question. Your second one is formulate. So formulate and critically evaluate ethical strategies for HRM and HRD to selected organizations and explain the changing role of HR function as based in these organizations. So again, 2 parts of this question, make sure you cover both parts. So do the first part where you're evaluating the ethical strategies, and the second one is explaining the changing role of the HR function based on these organizations. And lastly, analyze. So analyze your own personal development needs and learning styles. We will do around personal development plans. We will look at learning styles and where you can read up on those. You can look at your own learning style. So that's what you want to do in that question. You want to make sure that you look at what you've already done, what your own personal development to date is, and then you want to look at how you learn. Everyone learns differently. And then you want to, so what we want to do there is find out what you've done so far, what is relevant, what may be not relevant, and then where you want to go in the next 6 months. Then you want to look at why that you're going to do those why you're going to do the activities on your development program. So it's not just a program, it's specifically directed. So my own personal development program would be around leadership, and then specifically I enjoy and specialize in motivation and communication. And then reflect on and evaluate evidence of own development. So that's looking back at what you have done and where it's relevant, where it's not relevant, where you could have taken a different path. The accrediting body wants to see the advantages or the disadvantages or the limitations and strengths in both of those questions. So just an extra note is that your word count here is 2,000 words. Again, that's not a lot when you start to write this, and this is why I do this exercise at the start, to make sure that you cover all of what you need to cover. Please note that it's only 750 words max for learning outcome 4 and 5. Okay, has anyone any questions so far? You can put it in the chat box if you wish. Okay, great. Let's get started then. So, the basics. Human resource management, the process of hiring and developing employees. So you guys will know what human resource, oh, sorry, I do have a question. Oh, no, okay, perfect. So human resource management includes conducting job analysis, planning personnel needs, recruiting the right people, orientating, managing wage, salaries, benefits and incentives and performances. We have a good idea of what HR departments do, what HR management is. It has come a long way from just recruitment and I suppose retention. However, what we want to look at now is what's starting to emerge. Contemporary human resource management. What do we mean by that? So this is sort of a new-ish management approach. It is actually quite natural in a lot of organizations, but they're starting to bring it up as an actual area of focus. So they are up to date with the latest management theories and practices. So that's not just HR, that's management theories and practices. We will look at leadership theories and we will look at motivation theories in the next 2 sessions we have on this topic. And then we will look at how you would adapt the management style or leadership style, I prefer, to the needs of the organisation and the employees within it. Contemporary human resource management is aligning the HR strategies with the organisational strategic plans, leadership styles, and what's the best for what types of situations that HR professionals may find themselves in, and then stakeholder management, and then continued personal development, both for the HR professional themselves, but also for the team and teams that they may be involved in. The idea around this is that it's more of a cultural, holistic, and more efficient and effective way to do human resource management. So we should not be working in one human resource department. We should be aligning with the organisation as a whole. So here is the difference between the two-ish, not an exhaustive list. Responsibility for human resources. So traditionally there would be specialists. With strategic or contemporary human resource management, we want to involve all management. So if I'm the head of the HR department, traditionally all of the decisions would have been made within our team. Now we want to involve senior management, line managers, explain the HR strategies, why we're doing it, why they need to change. We are imparting the knowledge onto those managers who may be responsible for other areas within the business. Objective used to be better performance. However, we are starting to see that there is a much better approach, cultural change in the objective of human resource management. We want to look at more understanding and the use of human assets. So we want to understand the strengths and perceived weaknesses of the individuals in the organisation. We want to look at the different needs that people may need from a leader or a manager. We want to look at motivation types. What motivates one individual doesn't motivate the other individual, and what that can look like and how we can manage that more effectively and therefore better outcomes. The role of human resource management used to be to respond to needs. So we all worked in an office that you wouldn't speak to them until you needed them. Now the more contemporary approach is going to be to lead, inspire and understand. Time focus, HR was short-term results. So, you know, there was a query or a recruitment process and it was quick, done, over. Now we are looking at good, short, intermediate and long-term strategies. And of course, within that, there will be change in times and strategies and different elements that we'll look at. Control. So we look at the rules and the policies, position of power. And now we're looking at flexibility. So again, changing, ever-changing environments that we are all working in at the minute, and how to look at what we would like to do and what we may have to do, and then the risks involved, and then how we manage change along the HR route. The culture, we're looking at bureaucratic and top-down centralisation. So this is an autocratic leadership style that we'll learn, I think, in the second or third session. But now we want to look at an open, participative empowerment culture within HR management. Our major emphasis previously was following the rules, and now it should be around developing people and accountability. So it used to all come down to money. You know, we heard many times, if we sack that person, or you know, we'll save £50,000 or dollars or euros. We looked at people as in spreadsheets in terms of cost, and not really looking at the other elements. So we'd make decisions based on a very narrow point of view, which came down to the cost. But however, there is other elements here. And now we're looking at investment in our staff. We are looking at all the things that they provide, not just the job they do and how much they cost the organisation. So that gives you a good element of sort of the traditional HR management and what we are looking at in terms of this assignment. And hopefully organisations are starting to see a more strategic, contemporary, holistic view of HR management. So where will we start? This is a huge, huge topic. All aspects of the organisation has a direct effect on human resource management, and this is what we're talking about. It used to be that the HR people knew very little about the teams on the floor, or the finance people, or the sales people, etc. So, people in an office were making a decision based on no knowledge of what it was like to work in that team, which comes back to why strategic human resource management should be including the people that have these specialists' knowledge in that area. And an organization's strength is within its staff and teams. We are seeing this more and more. We're seeing it more recognized. Lots of leadership gurus, I suppose, which I am not one of, are explaining that, the staff should be your biggest strength. So, internal and external factors. Just going to go over a little bit of this. Every single piece of this diagram will affect human resource management. And as human resource professionals, we should be aware of these, as well as the practices that we have within the HR department. So our economic environment will affect HR management. Our legal environment obviously will, but it's not just in terms of human resource rights and employee rights or employers' rights or change in policy. There's other elements in terms of that as well. The competitive environment, we need to look at why maybe we are losing staff to a competitor and what we can do to increase our retention and our reputation of an organisation. Technical environment, of course, we look at exactly software. However, that's not the case in terms of just HR software or other areas around that. We need to look at it as a whole. There's many different reasons for that. Firstly, if we look at learners, and we talked about different people's learning styles, and that is true whether it's somebody on a factory floor or it's a senior manager coming in on a manufacturing level. We need to look at, the technology that we're using. We need to make sure that the people understand the technology. Is it efficient technology? If we have a brilliant head of manufacturing, but the technology tools that they have are not up with industry standard, then we need to look at that, because we are effectively setting that person up to fail. When we as HR people looking after our staff should be aware of those things. That's not to say that we have a magic wand and lots of money that we're able to bring in all of these things at the same time. However, awareness and knowledge is key to all of these contemporary approaches to strategy. The social environment is very, very, very important, but that's not just within the organisation, that is outside the organisation. So we've seen a few headlines around, for example, in the UK, the cost of living crisis, and various organisations trying to help employees. Some of them will get a headline out of it, some of them are not getting a headline out of it and just doing what they should be doing in terms of their employees. But it's lots of different social environments. There's, different people's cultures outside. It will come down to where we are able to sign off leave, for example. So, lots of different people's cultures will have different important days of the year. They may adhere to some practices. And we need to be aware of the social environment so that we can ensure that our employees have a safe and trusting environment for them to come and ask, and we understand how to manage that. We also need to look at global environment. So, we've seen lots of bike schemes and various things like that. But again, the pandemic is the obvious example on this, but there's many, many things that lead to a very uncertain environment globally. It could be travel, if staff travel out of our organization, the different elements of global troubles, visas, where the people are safe, maybe they need a risk assessment. There's many, many things here that we need to look at in terms of global environment. Now, internally, we're looking at management. So, are the management trained is my biggest issue, is that lots of managers and leaders aren't put through official leadership and management training, which I think should be compulsory. But it is also the management of the teams. So as a HR professional, we can understand the contemporary approach, we can adapt it, but if the rest of the people and the network within the organization don't understand it and don't practice it, we can't be there all the time for all the different people. So we need to ensure that the management as a whole is included in our strategies and in our thought process and in our culture and how we're changing the culture. Operations is the same. So we need to look at, what operationally do we need in terms of personnel and how we recruit and retain those people. And then we ensure that they are equipped for the job. They are the right people for the job. They have the right technology that we talked about. That in terms of operations, we're recruiting the right people for the right roles. First, we are identifying the right role, because often what traditionally would have happened is you had somebody in a team, you would have recruited someone, they left, used the same job description, re-recruited without looking at the culture, the operations of the team, how it's changed. So do we need to change the job specification? Is there a different need than was 2 years ago when that person was recruited? And that's what we need to look at. And there we go back to the management and why we need to educate all of the management in terms of this. So if we are, as an organization, employing, for example, client and services coordinator, and that person leaves after 2 years, and after 2 years, in actual fact, we've realized that the person needs to have more IT and governance skills. But if somebody uses the job description from 2 years ago, the business needs have changed, but the job description hasn't, and therefore we're recruiting the wrong person, and ultimately we're setting that person up to fail. So we need to make sure that we are aware of the operations and we identify if roles have changed, the business needs have changed. Even when that person is in a role, they might have been recruited 2 years or 3 years ago, but the business needs have changed, and then we need to look at how we manage that. Research and development, that is around the new practices around HR like this. We need to look at the development of our staff. There's a lot of discussion about work-life balance at the minute, and people are saying, oh, we can't recruit, nobody wants to work. And my response to that is, have you changed the way you recruit? Have you changed the way that you're looking at employees' needs? Are you looking at different ways to attract staff? Are you looking at different ways to attract talent? Are you looking at alternatives to the traditional recruitment methods? Are you developing your own staff to identify that 3 years ago, Anne was recruited, and since then Anne has done a qualification that no one knew about, or developed a skill no one knew about. So we're not analysing in the present needs and the present skills that we may have within our staff team. And are we looking at developing that? Have we got an administrator or a receptionist who would actually like to be in the social media department or the marketing department? You know, we're just going out to find a new marketing person, when if we have someone there who understands the culture, who understands the business needs, and actually wants to grow into that role, then that is a better option than bringing somebody in from the outside. Finance, obviously, we have to understand that from a HR point of view, but it's not just wages, it's not just employers' costs, it's what products are selling faster, what's more profitable. Okay, then we need to look at the team that we have in there, and are they the right team? Are they going to be able to sustain the profitability? Have we got redundancy in that team, that if somebody's sick, then somebody else knows the skills, and therefore we don't cost ourselves more money by bringing in temporary staff, for example? There's a number of elements around that as well. And marketing and sales. People think, oh, that's nothing to do with me. Every single person in an organization is part of sales and marketing. If your HR department start to get a reputation for not maintaining staff, not recruiting properly, recruiting the wrong people, word travels fast. You know, we've all known an organization will say, no, not applying to that organization. I've been approached for a number of different roles as CEO, and I've said, no, absolutely not, because of the sales and marketing, not because of the products, because of sales and marketing, but the actual organization itself. So, you know, again, your staff are your biggest strength. They're also your biggest marketing and sales tool if used correctly. Okay, so before we move on, has anyone any questions? I get very excited about this, so sometimes I forget to ask. Okay, so what are some of the factors that may affect an organizational environment? Oh, sorry. So sector changes, what are we talking about? We're talking about maybe supply and demand. We're talking about how no one wanted electric scooters 3 years ago. Now everyone wants an electric scooter. If we're a manufacturing firm and we manufacture similar products, why are we not manufacturing where the profit is? Why are we not looking at the trends? Why are we not looking at the media? Why are we not looking at the policies and politics that are showing that, you know, the electric scooters are better for the environment? I don't think they are, but you know, that's the type of sector changes that we're looking at. Where is my sector going? What are the major changes? What are the major changes of competitors? You know, suddenly a massive supplier into the sector may have gone into administration. There may be new players in terms of suppliers within the sectors. Manufacturing, at the minute, we're having huge issues around Brexit, in obviously oil and gas with the war in Ukraine. We are having travel from the manufacturer, maybe in China or various other countries. We're having issues with manufacturing, and the increase in materials are having a significant effect on organizations at the minute. Service sector, so for example, hospitality at the minute are struggling to recruit staff. Now, there's a number of different thought processes around that. Personally, mine is that people have started to see, after the pandemic, and we'll look a wee bit at Maslow's theory later on, but people are starting to reevaluate. People are starting to realize that they may have been scared during the pandemic. They may have lost people through the pandemic. They may have realised that the traditional being in the office 9 to 5, you can actually get a lot of work done at home. You can be more efficient if you're managed correctly. There's many, many different things here. So in the hospitality market, we have seen people saying, nope, I don't want to work for a minimum wage, 60 hours a week, running up and down a bar or managing a hotel or, you know, being a waiter or waitress. So they are struggling with servicing that sector at the minute, and understandably so. There's nothing wrong with employees starting to evolve and decide that they actually want a better work-life balance. They want a better life, I suppose. And the hospitality industry would be a difficult industry to recruit and retain staff anyway, but they are having huge issues. We're obviously seeing in the NHS, in the UK, National Health Service, that nurses and doctors they're struggling to recruit as well. In the care sectors, it's the same. They're struggling to recruit and therefore having to recruit internationally. And again, that's down to the same work conditions, pay, motivation, a blame culture. You know, it's not the patients that they have the issue with. It's all the other pressures and factors around that. So globalization and internationalization, internationalism, we are looking at a lot of brands starting to buy up globally. You know, back 20 years ago, we would have had local high street shops, restaurants, manufacturing firms, and now they're being bought by bigger umbrellas, which brings with it, for a HR manager, a significant issue. If a HR department is in America and they are trying to manage the UK laws or cultures or thought processes or motivation, they will be very different. Even, for example, I will give you a case study where in the UK, Tesco's always use agencies coming up to Christmas. Significant amount of agency workers are recruited, significant cost. And in England, they would use one large recruitment agency because it goes out to tender. They tried to do that here in Northern Ireland, and the people that were in England didn't understand the culture and the cost of living and the standards and the way that the people in Northern Ireland work and are recruited. And they ended up losing the contract in Northern Ireland, and it was given to a local firm. And that is a very small but very significant example, because if they had have, you know, that would have been a significant amount of money that they would have retained. And unfortunately, it was given to a local firm here. And obviously they had the advantage of it. So demographic, social and economic changes. We are looking at more multicultural organisations, which is fantastic. We are looking at the new generations that are coming up and have very different expectations, very different work ethic, very different way that they want to develop, lead. They want a better life-work balance. We are looking at pressures around costs, particularly at the minute, heating, food. We have, you know, significantly high food bank users in the UK. We are looking at potentially going into a recession next year. And again, as a HR manager, we should be aware of these changes because they will directly affect our staff. Employment rights is self-explanatory. They're changing all the time. As a matter of course, a HR manager should be up to date with all employment rights within the legal system. Health and safety provision. This is something that sometimes can be left to the Health and Safety Department. However, again, as a HR manager, we should be aware of the health and safety rules and regulations, same as the legal department, because it directly affects our staff. Also, it can affect our reputation as an organisation if we don't follow those rules. If we are significantly good at it, it can be a marketing tool, it can be a recruitment tool, it can be a retention tool. If people feel safe in their organisation for all of the different reasons that are included in the health and safety legislation, then we are more likely to retain and motivate those people. Diversity and equality issues. This is a very big area at the minute, under the spotlight, and rightly so, where we are looking at how those should be built into the culture of our organisation, that there is diversity, there should be equality, and how we manage that within an organisational context. Government subsidies, so we are seeing significant subsidies coming out after the pandemic and during the pandemic. That will have an effect. Furlough, for example, would have been the biggest one in recent times, but there is other ones that are on a lower scale, particularly job seekers or employment schemes to ensure that people maybe returners to work, returner after being sick, that maybe they've been off since the pandemic started. And that's us, we need to be looking at that as a HR manager to see what we can utilise. And also, again, if we are seen as an organisation who uses those subsidies for the right reasons, so employing non-graduates into apprentices, people who may have been out of work for a significant amount of time, and they are able to come and work for our organisation in a supported manner, not just recruiting them for the headline, but genuinely having a good policy and strategy in there to ensure that they're supported on that return to work. James Timpson would be one to follow on Twitter. He recruits significantly from the prison service and those prisoners who are being released, and a fantastic person to see how the government subsidies, but also leadership, also HR management, also going against a lot of negative social and mainstream media in terms of what he has done. Effects on government policy on tariffs. So we will see, I suppose the main one there would be import and export, particularly with Brexit at the minute, and that will make an effect on the cost may go up, and therefore our recruitment budget may be reduced, or our advertising budget for staff, or our development. So we need to be aware of that within the senior management team. Import substitution policies and foreign ownership policies. So there are two where, if you're working on a global scale, we're looking at what the import changes are, what are the legals, if we are bringing staff from other areas of the globe, then what are the policies? Do we have to change? Do they require visas? Are they able to come to the country? What provisions we need to put in place for that? And then foreign ownership policies, which we talked about, where globalization's happening and there's lots of different organizations purchasing organizations within other countries, and with that can provide a whole range of HR issues for us. Some of the other factors, the size and structure of the organization. So you may see an organization decrease in size, you may see it increase in size, you may see it fluctuate, you may see a fluctuation during the year. So if it's more of a seasonal organization, you may see an increase in the summer or the winter, Christmas time, holiday time, and we have to be aware of, first, the impact of those, and the impact on either the people that have gone or the people who have stayed, or the recruitment around those more busy periods of time, and how we bring them in, and we use our inductions to make sure that we empower them with the culture that we have in our organizations. Work-life balance we've talked about. We've seen a significant shift, particularly in the UK, around work-life balance. And if managed correctly, hybrid working or remote working can have a significant impact, reducing costs, increasing morale, motivation. There will be people that don't want to work at home. They are better working in the office. And we have to be aware of how those people work, what suits them, and what we can manage within the organizational needs. So it's not, yes, you've been working at home for the last 2 years and now you have to come into the office. No, not coming into the office. That's not how, we're not going to write a blank check on allowing people to do what they want. It has to meet the organizational needs as well. Typical work. So again, during different periods of time, audits, governance, sales, festive time, because we're coming into December, you know, the work of our people will change, and it should change. But you know, if it's atypical, then we need to look at maybe job rotation, or we need to look at job shadowing, to give a variety to our people within our organization as well. The change in nature of work is just how we tapped on there a wee bit, is that we need to first understand why the changes of the nature of work are happening, but we also need to look at, have we equipped our staff with the right tools and skills to be able to manage those changes. Some people are not good at changing. If your staff don't understand why the change is happening, they are told the change is happening and not explained that this is the background to the change and this is why this change is happening. We often get a decision sent to us with no explanation around it. If people have a better idea of the reasons for the change and how it's going to happen, why, what impact it will happen, how long it will take, you know, they will have a much more informed decision to make. And if it's something that goes against what they would like to do, then they have options. But it's a better tool to retain our staff by informing them of why the nature of work may change. Occupational stress, massive, huge, especially at the minute. The anxiety, mental health of staff all over the world has increased significantly. Now, as a HR manager, we are aware of that. You know, you can see it in any article that you read at the minute. What we need to look at is we need to look at the occupational stress. What elements within our organization are we able to maybe look at? What are we able to change? What are we able to improve on? What are we not able to improve on because it isn't within the organizational power to do so? So I'll give you an example. We're in a building in the middle of a industrial park, and people don't like it because it's near the scrapyard and a drilling. Those, you know, if that stresses someone out, there's not a lot we can do about it. However, if we have operational stress where we don't have sufficient water, or we don't have cooking facilities for lunchtime, or we don't have heat in the building. I worked for a charity who wouldn't replace the boiler in a very old building. And I said, you can't, you have to put a boiler in. Well, we can probably manage another 6 months. And this was over winter. And staff were so stressed out about it because they were trying to deliver for the charity, and a very worthwhile charity at the time. And, you know, there wasn't a discussion. Actually, I just went out and signed off the purchase of a new boiler to be fitted. Work intensification. So again, you know, there will be change in elements that will be in this list that will have an impact on that. You know, we will get busier at certain times of the year. The most obvious ones, I suppose, is end of year accounts or audits or governance, but sales coming up to Christmas, there may be holiday seasons, summer, etc. And we need to be aware of that. And we also need to make sure that we manage our managers so that they understand that you just can't assume that that will happen and it will have no impact. You have to look at the impact that comes out of that. Flexible firm model core. So we're looking there at flexibility within the workplace, you know, where we can be flexible within the model, brilliant. However, again, back to the changing nature of work, back to occupational stress, we can't do everything. We are not able to change and facilitate every need from a staff member. However, if we're seen to be flexible and where possible we can make changes, then we should be doing those things. Peripheral workers. So this will be the likes of your casual staff, temporary staff, self-employed staff. If there's an increase in temporary staff, that will have an impact on your core team. If there's a decrease in temporary staff, again, that will have an effect on your core team, workload, culture, back to possibly diversity and equality issues, where, you know, temporary staff coming into the organisation may not have worked in a different organisation, where culture around those things are important, and then you may get issues around disciplinaries, etc., for example, where temporary staff have caused issues for your core team. Change in expectations and materialism. So I suppose that we've seen a significant increase in the buyer's market in recent times. Lots of people have to have the new iPhone and the new iWatch, and you know, they are not happy just with the desk. I work at home, so I have a second-hand desk, and I have no issue with it. But I have been in many organisations that, you know, they want to have the new fancy desk, they want to have the best new Apple computer, and it's not us saying either that's of course or absolutely not. It's understanding it and then managing it. So explaining to our staff, yes, it would be great to all have the new Apple. However, sales are down by X, and therefore we don't have a budget to spend £20,000 on 10 new computers. So it's managing those expectations and changing expectations. So we've seen an increase, for example, in electric cars, particularly around company cars. And it can be but he or she got, or that other firm has, and us managing those expectations. Management and leadership style have a huge impact on our organizational environment. Management is actually about a 50-year-old concept. It's not an old concept, it's very new. Leadership styles have been around for a very long time. I'm going to put a copy or a link to a short TED Talk that will help you understand that a bit more. We will go into it in session 2 or 3. But there is a very different, a very clear division between management and leaders. So you can have a manager title, but you might not be a leader, and you might be a leader, but don't have a management title. And also different people respond to different types of leadership styles. And we have to understand when to use those leadership styles and when not to use those leadership styles, and who responds to different types of leadership styles, what the organization or the situation requires. So it might not be that I would love to use this type of leadership style, however, the organization or the situation is not allowing me to use that leadership style. But it's also us explaining why. Job satisfaction. we should be looking at, are our teams satisfied? Have they got too much work? Have they not enough? Have we equipped them correctly? Have we trained them correctly? Are we ensuring that the work itself is not mundane and repetitive? Are we looking at alternatives for our staff? Are we looking at a development plan for our staff? That might not be within the organisation, but that's not to say that we can't put a development plan in place for all of our staff members. And then trade union membership. So we've seen significant changes and protests and strikes in the UK at the minute around trade union memberships and what the trade union trends are happening. There's a lot of different unions talking to each other and they're coordinating their strikes. And that will have a significant impact on us as HR management. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a break, because you've listened to me for an hour. So I'm going to break now until 6:10, and then I'm going to come back. In the meantime, So we've looked at some of the factors that are listed in your mark sheets in regards to this task. However, it is a very comprehensive list and something that we absolutely should be aware of in human resource management. So now we want to look at, we've identified the different factors that may affect, okay? That what you need to do here is you need to then evaluate these, like prioritize them, look at, as I said, what can affect, what may not affect, what is there areas that we can change and use in the culture, is there areas that are beyond our control, and we need to manage those changes. This is where we evaluate the part of that question, okay? And then we need to assess them. So how do we assess? There's a couple of different models, okay? You've probably come across these before. So I've given you a little bit of a cheat sheet, I suppose, for 3 different tools to assess this area. Now, we'll look at PESTEL, we're going to look at Steeple, we're going to look at SWOT analysis, okay? However, what I would like to point out is that in this slide, I have put the majority of external factors, okay? So these would be, we would use the PEST analysis or the Steeple analysis for. So we're looking at the external factors. These, the majority of, are internal factors, and these are what we would use within the SWOT analysis that we will talk about. So PESTEL, political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environment, okay? So the external factors here, politics, political decisions. We're looking at the factors, but we're looking at it in terms of this model. Government stability, financial stimulus commitment, pandemic strategic plan, possibly 2 years ago, possibly we're still in some of those in certain industries, certain organizations in certain countries. Health service, pandemic, taxation policy, current and future political support, grants, trade bodies, effects of war or worsening relations with particular countries, election campaigns we will see coming up shortly, and issues featuring in political agendas. So what I want you to do is look at that list and then go back to the factors and look at how those would impact your organization, but also in a HR context. Economical, so national debt, recovery struggle, strength of consumer spending, current and future levels of government spending, ease of access to loans, current and future levels of interest rates, specific taxation policies, exchange rates, overall economic situation, real estate or property here in the UK, inner city business decline or increase, and supply volatility. So again, we want to look at the factors that we discussed in the last slides and put them into these contexts. For some organizations and for some of you that are working within organizations, some of these might not affect it. They probably will in some small capacity. However, that depends on the size of the organization, depends on the structure, it depends if it's global, depends if it's localized. So there's many of these that may not have an issue, but what we want to do is I want you to explore those factors within this tool. Pandemic lifestyle, we talked about social, demographics, customer attitudes, media views, huge influence on human resource management. People sometimes don't see it. Laws change in terms of social factors, brand, company image, technology, consumer buying patterns, fashion role models, major events and influence, inner city pandemic trends, or the lack of, religious and ethnic factors, ethical issues, and digital relationships. So again, look at the factors that we talked about and try and put them into your organizational context and how they might affect your human resource management. This is where we're looking at strategic or contemporary human resource management. Technological, Relationship with the pandemic, sector technology demand is something we already discussed. Relevant current and future technology innovation, the level of research funding, the ways in which consumers make purchases, intellectual property rights and copyright infringements, global communication and technology advances, internet connectivity, utility. So back to the second one, a good example of that is sometime, 2-3 years ago, we may not have used Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, all the other areas that we might use online. Obviously, there has been a substantial increase in users on this, and more built into organizations. And that, as a HR person, from a very basic point of view, we should make sure that they are fully equipped with training, they are fully equipped with the correct packages, and we should also ensure that if there's any GDPR or there's policies in place in terms of using these different programs. Legal legislation in areas such as employment, competition, health and safety. We talked about those earlier in the session. Environmental legislation, future legislation that's coming. We may see, for example, in the UK that the minimum wage will have an increase, will have a significant direct impact in terms of HR management. Changes in European law or other global law, trading bodies, regulatory bodies, pandemic legislation would have had an effect. Going forward, people are calling now for, are acknowledging the lack of pandemic advice and legislation when it was so strong 2 years ago, and what should we do in terms of a very direct example would be sickness, or if somebody has been tested positive for COVID, there's not an awful lot of guidelines in the majority of countries at the minute. Working environment, and then pandemic legal sensitivities. So environmental, we are looking at relationship with global warming. Do we want to be seen as a green organisation? Is there elements that we could change? There's a lot of going paperless with the use of email and various online platforms. Again, back to the electric cars, for example, where a lot of company cars have been changed to electric, and then there's been recent reports about how that they're not actually as beneficial to the climate and global warming as first thought. Relationship with recycling and the global fight against waste. Again, is that something we can look at? Is it something that will motivate our current employees? Will it attract new? Because there's a lot more people aligning their own values with the values of an organisation, and are we looking at that, and are we utilising that to make sure that we bring in the people that we want? If we have an incredible engineer, who is a climate activist, maybe, is that something that we want to be seen to be doing? And therefore we're able to recruit on a different level and in a different way. The relationship with global fight against plastic usage. So that will be your bigger, maybe manufacturing firms, organizations. It may be packaging. There may be other organizations that you may work in that have a large output of plastic or other waste. And are we looking at that from a HR point of view in terms of what we can do to manage that? We can manage the staff, we can educate the staff on these issues. The level of population created by the product or service that we produce, attitudes towards the environment from the government, the media, consumers, relationship with renewable energy. We're seeing a lot more discussions around that in Parliament and politics in the UK. And what are we doing to sustain renewable energy, especially in light of the Ukraine war and the increase in prices in gas and electric. And in Northern Ireland, 70% of households here are still using oil-fired central heating. So that is causing another issue here in Northern Ireland. And then relationship with deforestation. So that, again, that might be back to, you know, the very basics of reducing our paper, our packaging, cardboard boxes, and other materials that would have an effect there. So again, we want to look at the factors that we talked about in the last slides, and we want to analyze them. So we've identified them, we want to evaluate them, and then we want to assess them. Okay. Another one around, it's similar to the pestle analysis. We've already talked about social, technological, economical, environmental, political, legal. Ethical is the one that's being added in here. So this another is a culture. We talked about diversity, we talked about equal rights, and here we want to look at the duties of an employer, our duties, our corporate services, corporate values, our corporate social responsibility, our contribution to society, our behaviour as an employer, what is good or bad for your employees, the integrity of our messaging as a HR department, employee well-being, trust, equality, and policies for health and safety in a work setting. So these are very, very, very prevalent in HR management. This is the area that we should be concentrating on the most, whilst keeping the other factors and making sure that we are aware of them, we have evaluated them, and we continue to evaluate them, because we'll talk about this later on in the other two sessions, where it's an ever-changing environment, and as HR, contemporary HR management, we should be aware of the ever-changing environment and the different elements. So we should be reviewing this on a very regular basis. We will talk about the psychological contract later on, where organisations and individuals have a psychological contract, and what they expect from us as an organisation, and what we expect from them, and what is possible or what is within the business needs, and how that model can be looked at in terms of HR. SWOT analysis. I am sure that you have done these many times. I've put little cheat questions in here. So we want to look at the internal factors that may affect, that we talked about in the slides previously. So the internal factors, not external. We want to look at the strengths of the organisation. We want to look at the weaknesses of the organisation. We want to look at the opportunity in the organisation, and we want to look at the threats in the organisation. And we want to look at that and assess that and evaluate that based on the factors that we talked about in the previous slides. So what are our strengths? Are we using those effectively? Are we utilising our strengths? Are we making sure that our staff strengths are being recognised? Are we achieving with those? Where are our weaknesses? Is it within teams we have one person that only has one skill set, that if they walked out of the building tomorrow, could we replace them? What would happen? What would be the impact? Could we function? People don't think about transferable skills as much as they should, in my opinion. Where are we lacking in terms of recruitment? Why are we not able to recruit in that area? Why are we struggling with retention? Is it the overall organisational reputation and not our job in terms of HR? Is it budgetary cuts? Is it constraints around budgets? Is it morale? Is it motivation? Is it culture? You know, there's all of those issues around weaknesses. Our opportunities is, you know, where are we developing our own staff to retain them? Where are we improving our image and our reputation to recruit? Where are we doing a skills matrix of our staff, our employees on a regular basis to ensure that first we're utilising every aspect of the employee? Are we lacking in motivation? And that is an opportunity to put some of the motivation theories we'll talk about in the next sessions into place and recognising the different ways in terms of motivation and individuals and how they're motivated. What are our threats? going back to the last conversation, if that person walks out tomorrow, what happens? What's the impact on that team? What's the impact on the organization? If somebody writes a bad review on social media, massive threat to the organization, can affect human resources in so many ways. Different teams may not know about that until they see it online, and then they start to have a negative impression of the organization, or potential employees may do, or competitors might use it to their advantage and to our disadvantage. So we need to look at the threats that face the organization as well. So we need to plan. What are the risks? What are the consequences of what we have done in terms of identifying, evaluating, and assessing those previous factors? What are the short-term risks? What are the consequences of those? So we're going into a very deep matrix here. We're looking at the factors. We're looking at how, why, when, where they might affect human resource management. We're looking at evaluating them in terms of PESTEL or STEEPLE or SWOT analysis. But what is the reason we're doing that? Why are we doing all of that work and all of that exercise? It's because we want to plan. So if a staff member walks out tomorrow and they are an integral part of a team, what is the short-term plan? What is the medium-term plan? What's the long-term plan? What's the contingency plan? If the building's internet goes down, if the IT system goes down, what in terms of HR and the factors involved are our short, medium, long-term plans in terms of that? We also need to think of planning alongside, and we'll talk about this a wee bit later, aligning ourselves with the company policies and procedures and operational and strategic plans, so that it's a more holistic view in terms of human resource management. So what we need to look at here are, what are the risks? What are the consequences of those factors, those changes, and how we might manage those if that happens. So if we looked at an emergency plan, if the lights go out in the building, this is what we do. If the IT system goes down, this is what we do. But what we should be doing is, as HR professionals, we should be doing that in terms of how it affects the employees within our organization. And we should be reviewing this on a regular basis. So we need to look at those factors individually, maybe within the PESTEL or the SWOT analysis, and then we need to write a plan. We need to have a plan in place that we have a backup. We have an idea that what we would do in those situations, and how we would manage those expectations, or manage that change, or manage that situation. We also should be sharing that with our senior team, other managers that may be key managers within an organisation, and we need to be sure to review those plans on a regular basis. So what we're doing here is we are squaring the circle, even though it's an awful saying. But why are we doing all the research? Why are we doing all the tools? Because then we can plan for those things to happen, and therefore we are doing our job correctly. So if the pandemic happened again, for example, we would be, I hope, much more prepared, and we would have a short-term plan, we'd have a medium-term plan, we'd have a long-term plan, we'd potentially have a contingency plan as well. Ooh, okay. Has anyone any questions before I go any further? Okay, so we are looking at the human resource management process. So here we have got, internal recruitment, external recruitment. We've got selection, we've got training on and off the job, assessing performance, rewards and benefits, motivation, recognition, traditional methods of assessing performance, modern methods of assessing performance, compensation, i.e. wages or others, maintaining labour relations, health and safety, and welfare of those employees, and compliance of labour laws. So that, I suppose, is what the role of human resource strategies and how we plan those, and what we need to look at is how those factors that we talked about and evaluated and what could happen and how it would impact on the HRM process, and what strategies we would put in place or plans, because we've identified how those factors may affect these parts of the process. Also, we need to look at the vision, the mission, values, strategies, long-term, and objectives, the annual goals, the department goals, and the individual goals and actions. So what we're looking at here is how does our HRM or our human resource development match in with the organisation's, firstly, the process itself, but also it's not just the mechanics of it. It's not the steps to the top of the building, which are these. It is also, it should be in terms of vision, mission, values, strategies, goals, department goals, and individual goals. Here we're creating a structure. Would you share this deck? What does that mean? I've just got a question here. Nice to get a question. So here is what we're looking at in terms of not just the process, creating a culture. What is the vision for the organization? How does that impact on human resource management? What is the vision of the organization? Is human resources or is the staff actually involved in that vision? Like, are the staff strengths or staff, is one of our aims or objectives or mission or values to be a good employer, to ensure that the well-being of our staff is first and foremost in our, yes, of course I will. So here's where the culture comes in. It's not just the process of the HR, it is the unseen. It is the culture. It is that we should, as employers, make sure that within our values, we are identifying what we want to achieve as an employer, what we want our employees to feel, and that should then go down into annual goals, departmental goals, and then hopefully down into the staff members themselves. So a little bit about the psychological contract. So psychological contract is individuals' beliefs shaped by an organisation regarding the terms of an exchange between individuals and their organisation. So this is just a quote for you to have an idea of what a psychological contract is. So beliefs, what does that mean? It means recent emphasis on promise, implicit and explicit. It's the exchange, so what the employee gives and gets in return, and the organisation, management, HR, policies, practice and culture. So what it's saying here is that we need to manage the expectations of the psychological contract with the employer. So we've got the organisation on one side, the employee on the other, and we need to understand what they believe and what we believe, and do they match, do they balance the exchange. So the employee wants to make sure that if they work 40 hours a week, they will get their salary. Now, obviously the contemporary HR, we are looking at much, much more than just receiving a salary, but that is in the very basics. And the organisation is that we are putting in the correct management and leadership. We are putting in the correct HR policies and practices, and that they're actually used, and that they're actually used within a cultural context. So Are we creating a culture of diversity and equality? Are we creating a well-being, welfare culture, all-inclusive culture, a culture where our staff feel safe to come to managers or leaders with particular issues? Are we creating a no-blame culture where we are able to ensure that staff, if they don't understand something or they would like to investigate a new way of doing something, that they're comfortable coming to us? If we are looking at a culture where, for example, huge one at the minute, mental health, there's lots of organizations that say you can come to us, blah blah blah, but the reality is no one would genuinely speak up about it. So we need to look at the culture, and that should be within the remit of human resources. So this is the little psychological contract: what the individual receives and gives, and what the organisation receives and gives. And we should have a balance there. Now, there will be times that the individual may get more from the organisation than others. There may be times where the organisation gets more than the individual. I suppose traditionally we would have a significant lean towards the organisation. 30, 40, 50 years ago, you went to your job, you got told what your salary was, you did your job, that was it. But now we're seeing a very, very big swing in terms of individuals demanding changes in those. We are looking at hybrid working will be one, healthcare, pensions have been another, even though it's a legal requirement now in the UK, but we are seeing significant competition between organisations. So it's actually going the other way, where individuals are demanding better treatment, better policies, better benefits, cultures. Does the alignment of the individual align with the values of the organisation? We're seeing individuals genuinely not applying for jobs for different beliefs, cultures, climate change, reputation, influencers on TikTok. So we're seeing a significant switch that has been accelerated by the pandemic towards individuals. Now, of course, that's not all industries, and it will be different levels of management that will have the options, I suppose, to demand that. But having said that, we are now seeing significant strikes in the UK to demand it in terms of numbers rather than the individual. Taking the power back is what the unions would say. So here is icebergs. Love them. Use them in everything that I do. The iceberg is what we see above the water and what we don't see below the water. And this is very significant in terms of contemporary human resource management. We want to see and be aware of what's under the water. So traditionally, back to the very start, we're looking at traditionally good work, fair pay. That's what the contract was. We recruit you, you do good work, we'll pay you fairly, I hope. However, delving into contemporary human resource management, we are looking at all the things below the waterline here. So honesty, care, resources, work-life balance, fairness, stay current in knowledge, competent co-workers, which is something that's, if one person's carrying a team, that's something we should be aware of. Good relationships, loyalty, training, safety, diversity, security, promotion. If we make a commitment, we honour it. Best possible performance, our bosses, co-workers, benefits, recognition, good communication, positive promotion, and non-pay rewards, and respect. So these are the things that we need to look at in terms of when we're looking at HR strategies, and policies and practices within the context of those things that might, the factors that might impact it, what we can and can't do, and then how we put together our strategies. But we keep all of this in mind in terms of what the strategy will have in it. So again, it's not this factor is going to affect our staff. So for the sake of argument, there is a change in minimum wage. So there's a change in minimum wage. The government have said, actually, it's now going to be X pounds an hour. We've got that information as HR people. We take that information on board. We implement it as fair pay. So back to the good work, fair play. However, why are we not looking at the things below the waterline? You know, why have we just put the pay in? Why are we not looking at adequate resources? Why are we not looking at training people? Why are we not looking at development? The reality is most people are not motivated by money. A lot of people disagree with, but we will do it in the motivation theory. But if you start to look between now and maybe your next session, there is other factors that will keep somebody in a job. In fact, there'll be very few that will stay long-term in any position based on money only, because it's not a motivational factor. It's a factor, and it'll be a factor from a competitor's point of view, a retention point of view, but it's not a motivator. So if you have, for example, I had an employee recently, she line managed 2 other employees. They have continuously complained about their pay for the last 2 years. And she was exacerbated by this. She was just, and HR has got involved and everybody got involved. And I said to her, okay, you're in local government, there's pay scales involved. So it doesn't matter what you say. It's not within your remit to change their salary. Yes, but I said, but nothing. They have been in the job 2 years. So therefore, there's other factors that they are staying in that role. They are adults. They can leave and move to another position, especially in the employee world, focus world that we have at the minute. You know, it is an employee's market. We had HR involved. I just came in as a consultant. And she said, I went back to them and said, can't change your pay. This is the first time she's done this. So if you want to leave, then leave. But there must be other reasons why you stay. And for the first time, one of them said it's close to home. And the other one said, I enjoy working with the young people. So money wasn't actually the motivator. She was fearful that they would leave and she needed them as part of the team because they were struggling to recruit, short supply of staff. And over that short conversation, she was able to identify that there was other motivating factors that they stayed in the job. So that took the pressure off her, which took the pressure off the HR people. And that's what we were talking about in terms of what motivates people. And genuinely, money does not motivate people. There is many, many other factors that play in motivation. So it is 7:15. You have listened patiently for the last nearly 2 hours and 45, or 1 hour and 45 minutes. I'm going to finish on this iceberg because it's a fantastic image to focus on. And we will look at we will start the next session on the HR planning process. So this is back to our short-term, medium terms, but we're looking at the planning process next, and then we'll look at stakeholder engagement and mapping, and then we will look at the other questions, content in the third session. So I'm going to finish for tonight. I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions. Feel free to put them in the chat box or switch your cameras on and ask my question. I will reiterate that the content itself will probably be sufficient for you to understand and research and reference. The key to these assignments is reading and covering the criteria within the question. So go back to those early slides and make sure you, and it's a good tip for other assignments as well. It's the construction of the question is where learners often lose marks, because they understand the content, they're able to explain it, they're able to present their case for their point, they're able to evidence their case with external referencing, but it will be that they miss some of the criteria of the actual question itself. So have a look back at those, have a look back at the factors, and then have a look back at using the tools to evaluate the factors, and then how they would impact and how they would impact on a HR strategy. And then we will look at next how to plan those HR strategies to be able to mitigate some of those consequences or risks. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I will put the PowerPoint into the group chat. Oh, where's it? Oh, here we go. We're on Teams more than we're on Zoom, so. Sorry, different system. I'm going to do. Normally I'm not asked to. Okay, so you've got the file on the PowerPoint. I'll stay on the call for the next few minutes. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. If not, I will see you in the next session. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for your time.
You're so welcome.
Have a nice evening.
You too.
Thanks.